It wasn't supposed to end like this. When Jessica first brought up the party, I didn't think much of it. After all, we'd been married long enough for me to know her routine: an evening out with Tara and her crew, a few drinks, maybe some dancing. Nothing too crazy. At least, that's what I used to believe. But something about this particular party felt different. Maybe it was the way she slipped it into conversation so casually, or the fact that Tara had a reputation for throwing the kind of parties where anything goes. I tried to shake the feeling, to not let my mind spiral, but my gut wouldn't let it go. I knew Jessica well enough to notice the subtle changes, the way she seemed distracted lately, the late nights with little to no explanation. We'd argued about it before, but this time, it wasn't just frustration or jealousy eating at me. This time, it felt like something was slipping away, something important. The night before the party, I finally said what had been weighing on me. "I don't think you should go," I told her, trying to keep my voice even. "It's not that I don't trust you, Sarah, but lately, I don't know. It feels like we're not on the same page anymore." I wasn't expecting her reaction. "You're being paranoid again," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "It's just a party. Tara's throwing it, not some stranger. Why do you always do this?" "Always." That word hit harder than I expected. She made it sound like I was constantly breathing down her neck, suffocating her with doubt. But that wasn't the case. I had given her space, let her live her life, trusted that our relationship was strong enough to withstand whatever temptations came our way. But lately, she'd been distant, emotionally, physically. We still lived under the same roof, but I could feel her slipping through my fingers. "I'm not trying to control you," I said, doing my best to stay calm. "I just need you to hear me. Something about this party doesn't sit right with me. Can we at least talk about it?" She rolled her eyes, brushing off my concerns like they were nothing more than petty insecurity. "Talk about what? You're acting like the second I walk through the door, I'm going to run off with some guy. It's just a night out, for God's sake." But it wasn't just a night out. It was everything: the late nights, the vague excuses, the way she seemed so far away even when she was right next to me. It felt like we had been unraveling for months, and this party was just another thread coming loose. Still, I didn't push. I don't know why. Maybe I was just tired of being the one fighting to pull us back together while she seemed more and more willing to drift apart. So when she walked out that night, I let her go. But I couldn't sit still. As the hours crawled by, my mind ran in circles, playing out every scenario I didn't want to imagine. The house felt empty, unbearably silent. By midnight I still hadn't heard from her. No call. No text. Just a cold, vacant space where she should have been. That's when I made a decision, one that would change everything. I grabbed my phone, opened the tracking app we had installed months ago when she kept misplacing hers, and I followed her. It felt wrong. Invasive. But I didn't care. I needed to know where she was. I needed to know what she was doing. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. The app loaded, and her location popped up on the screen. I expected the app to show her at Tara's house, maybe a bar nearby. Instead, what popped up on the screen made my stomach drop: a motel on the outskirts of town. I stared at the glowing map, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. A motel? What the hell was she doing there? A wave of dread surged through me, tangling with the anger already building in my chest. This wasn't just a party. Something else was going on, something I hadn't let myself believe. Before I even realized what I was doing, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive felt endless, though in reality, it was probably only 20 minutes. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The pounding in my chest was deafening, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every few seconds, I glanced at my phone, watching the blinking dot that ethaned Sarah's location. Still at the motel. Still there. Not moving. Part of me wanted to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen it. Maybe there was an innocent explanation, some reason I hadn't considered. But deep down, I knew better. The distance between us over the last few months hadn't been my imagination. It wasn't just stress or work. It was something else. Something worse. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I parked a little ways from the building, not wanting to draw attention. There weren't many cars, and none of them looked familiar. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the flickering neon sign that read Westmore Motel. The letters buzzed faintly in the night, casting a dull glow over the cracked pavement. The place was a dump. The kind of spot people came to when they didn't want to be seen. Cheap. Discreet. The perfect hideaway for affairs and secrets. I opened the app again, as if hoping for a different answer, but the little dot hadn't budged. She was still inside. One of those rooms. The app didn't list a room number, but it wouldn't be hard to figure out. There weren't that many possibilities. Taking a slow breath, I stepped out of the car and made my way across the lot, forcing myself to stay steady, to keep my emotions in check. The cool night air did nothing to settle the storm inside me. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Every worst-case scenario played out in vivid detail. Jessica in a room with someone else, smiling, laughing, doing things she hadn't done with me in months. I passed a few doors, each etchinged with faded numbers. 201. 202. 203. As I neared the end of the row, my pace slowed. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I stopped near the last few rooms, my eyes scanning the parking lot. And then I saw it, her car. It was parked at the far end, tucked away like she didn't want anyone to notice. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stood there, staring at it, the weight of reality crashing down on me. There was no more pretending. No more excuses. She was here, at a motel, and there was no good reason for it. The trust we had built over the years, gone. Shattered in an instant, replaced by something cold and ugly. My fists clenched at my sides as I turned toward the closest door near her car. Room 214. The blinds were shut tight, but a faint glow from a lamp seeped through the edges. I hesitated, my breath shallow. Did I really want to know? Did I really want to see what was on the other side of that door? Yes. I had to. I lifted my hand to knock, but stopped just inches from the door. Instead, I pressed my ear against it, listening. At first, nothing. Just silence. Then, faint voices. Hers. Laughing softly. A man's voice followed, low, muffled, but enough to make my blood boil. I didn't need to hear more. Without thinking, I pounded on the door. Hard. The voices inside stopped abruptly. Movement. Shuffling. Whispers. Panic. Adrenaline surged through me, my entire body trembling. I knocked again, harder this time. Sarah! Open the door! I shouted, my voice raw with anger. For a moment, nothing. Just silence. Then, the door cracked open, just enough for me to see her face. She looked pale, stunned, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing there. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged. She looked exactly like someone who had been caught in the middle of something she couldn't talk her way out of. What the hell are you doing here? She hissed, her voice low, her eyes darting around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. I didn't care about making a scene. What am I doing here? I shot back, pushing the door open wider. What are you doing here? That's when I saw it. The room. The bed. The rumpled sheets. And him. A man I didn't recognize. Just some random guy, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking just as shocked as she was. Exactly as I'd feared. Jessica hurried out, pulling the door shut behind her like she could somehow erase what I'd just seen. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her voice shaky. But her eyes told the truth. She was scrambling, desperate to regain control of the situation. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is. I couldn't believe it. After everything. After all the chances I had given her. She had still done this. She reached for my arm, her fingers brushing against me. Let me explain, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I yanked away, disgusted. Explain? I scoffed. Explain what, Sarah? You're here. In a motel. With him. I said. I repeated, my voice cold, each word heavy with the weight of her betrayal. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, she had no excuse, no clever lie to spin. And that's when I knew it was over. There was nothing left to salvage. Everything I had been holding on to, everything I had convinced myself we could fix, was gone. Sarah's hand dropped to her side, the shock on her face fading, replaced by something colder. Defensive. Like she was already calculating her next move. The man inside hadn't even bothered to come out. He was still sitting there, probably hoping I'd just walk away. Too much of a coward to face the wreckage he'd helped create. "This isn't what you think," Jessica said, her voice steadier now, trying to reclaim some control over the situation. But it was too late. I had already seen enough. "Just let me explain, okay? Can we go somewhere and talk?" I let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh, anger and heartbreak churning inside me. "Talk?" I shot back. "What is there to talk about, Sarah? I've been losing sleep, thinking something was wrong with us. And here you are, proving me right." She glanced back at the door, her eyes flicking toward the guy still sitting inside, then back at me. I could see the panic in her face, the wheels turning as she tried to find a way to spin this, to make it seem like less than what it was. "It's not what you think," she insisted, her voice shaky. "It's just, things haven't been right between us for a while. I didn't know how to deal with it. I just needed to clear my head." "To clear your head?" I cut in, my voice rising. "Is that what you call this?" I shook my head, disgusted. "I don't need to hear your excuses, Sarah. You're caught. Don't insult me by pretending this is anything but what it is." She took a step closer, her expression softening, like she thought she could still fix this, still manipulate the situation. "I'm sorry, okay?" she pleaded. "I messed up. I know I messed up. But let's just go somewhere and talk about this. We can figure it out." Figure it out. The words echoed in my head, hollow and meaningless. Figure what out? That the person I thought I knew had been lying to my face for months? That she had already checked out of our relationship long before tonight? I took a step back, widening the space between us. "No, Sarah. You don't get it," I said, my voice flat. "I'm done. There's nothing left to figure out. You made your choice the moment you stepped into that room. You didn't care about us then, and you sure as hell don't care now." She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice quieter now, not out of anger but exhaustion. Because I was exhausted. Tired of carrying the weight of our crumbling relationship alone. Tired of fighting for someone who had already walked away. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes dropped to the ground, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking, just enough for me to see. The guilt was there, but not for me. It was for herself. She wasn't sorry for what she had done, she was sorry she got caught. Sorry that this wasn't playing out the way she had hoped. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking just a little. "I didn't think it would get this far." I stared at her, incredulous. "Get this far?" I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Sarah, you've been lying to me for months. Disappearing. Making excuses. And I sat at home like an idiot, thinking it was my fault. And now, after all that, all you have to say is that you didn't mean for it to get this far?" She looked up at me, eyes pleading. "Please, I don't want this to be the end. We can fix this. I'll end it with him, I swear. I'll make it right." I let out a laugh, harsh, humorless. The kind of laugh that comes when you've reached the breaking point. When you realize there's nothing left to fight for. "End it with him?" I shook my head. "Sarah, it was already over the moment you decided to lie. The moment you chose someone else over us. You don't get to make it right now." Then came the tears. Real or fake, I couldn't tell anymore. She wiped at her eyes, trying to look remorseful, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. No amount of tears could change that. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just a cold, hollow certainty. "You need to leave," I said quietly, my voice void of emotion. The rage had burned out, leaving only exhaustion in its place. "Go back inside. Do whatever you want. But don't come home. We're done." Her head shook frantically, panic flashing across her face. Please don't say that, she begged. Don't just throw us away like this. I exhaled sharply, feeling one last wave of anger rise up before I forced it back down. Throw us away? I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. You already did that, Sarah. I'm just finishing what you started. And with that, I turned and walked away. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also more certain. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the regret on her face, didn't want to hear any more lies, any more empty apologies. As I got into my car, the weight of it all hit me. It was over. Years of marriage, love, and trust, gone in a single night. And yet, as I drove away from that motel, something unexpected settled over me. Relief. Like I had been carrying an unbearable weight for months, trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. Now, at least, the truth was out. And the fight was finally over. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as the city lights blurred past. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only a dull numbness behind. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel betrayed. I just felt empty. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Not with some half-hearted apology outside a sleazy motel. Not with Jessica begging for something that was already gone. We both knew it was already gone. I had spent years believing we could work through anything, that no matter how rough things got, we'd find our way back. But standing in that parking lot, watching her lies unravel one by one, I realized something. The Jessica I married wasn't there anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts tangled in a mess of anger, exhaustion, and disbelief. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the sight of our house brought me no comfort. It looked the same, but it felt different. This wasn't home anymore. It was just a house, a place where two people had spent months, maybe even years, pretending they could hold on to something that had died long before tonight. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the front door. Once I stepped inside, everything would change. There was no avoiding it. But I wasn't ready. Not for the memories. Not for the silence. So I just sat there, replaying everything in my head, every missed sign, every moment I should have known. The late nights with vague excuses. The way she'd come home and act like nothing was wrong, even though I could feel the distance stretching wider between us. The times I had tried to reach her, to talk, to fix things, only for her to shut down, brushing off my concerns like I was imagining things. How long had she been cheating? How long had she been lying to me? Bitterness burned in my chest, but I forced it down. What was the point of anger now? The truth was, I had already lost her. I had just been too stubborn to see it. With a deep breath, I finally stepped out of the car and into the house. The place was dark. Quiet. Just like it had been when she left earlier that night. I tossed my keys onto the counter and stood there in the kitchen, letting the weight of everything crash down on me. The clock read 2 a.m. She'd be back soon. Or at least I thought she would. The fight outside the motel had been raw, brutal, but I knew Jessica well enough to know she wouldn't just disappear. She'd try to come home. Try to explain. Try to convince me that it was all a mistake, that we could fix this. But I was done. I walked to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall as I took a long drink. The taste was bitter. But it didn't matter. I needed something, anything, to cut through the emptiness settling in. I thought back to the night we first moved into this house. We'd been married for 2 years, still caught in that honeymoon phase where everything felt easy, where love was effortless. I could still see Sarah's excitement, the way she beamed as we unpacked, how we spent hours laughing, talking about the future we were going to build together. We had plans. Big plans? Kids. Vacations. A whole life stretched out ahead of us. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now, all I could see was the look on her face when she opened that motel door, the panic, the guilt. But more than that, the lies. Even caught red-handed, she still tried to twist it, still acted like there was something left to salvage. Like we could just sweep it under the rug and go back to pretending everything was fine. But there was no going back. Not anymore. The front door creaked open, and I heard her footsteps hesitating in the hallway. She must have been wondering if I was still here. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, sipping my beer, staring at the wall, waiting for what I already knew was coming next. A moment later, she stepped into the living room. Her face was pale, eyes red from crying. She looked different now, like the weight of what she'd done was finally crashing down on her. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. She sank into the chair across from me, careful to keep her distance. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like miles. "Can we talk?" she finally whispered, her voice barely holding together. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I just took another sip of my beer, letting the quiet stretch between us until it became unbearable. Finally I exhaled, my voice cold, detached. "What is there to talk about?" She wiped at her eyes, sniffling. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I swear, it wasn't." She swallowed hard. "It wasn't what it looked like." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "It wasn't what it looked like," I repeated, shaking my head. "Sarah, I caught you in a motel room with another man. How much worse could it be?" She flinched, her breath catching. "It was a mistake," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I made a horrible choice. But it's not what you think." I finally turned to look at her. She stood there in the doorway, hesitating, her fingers gripping the edge like she was afraid to step inside. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, but I didn't feel anything, not pity, not anger, not even sadness. Just exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Just listen." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, waiting, because deep down, I already knew, nothing she was about to say could change a damn thing. She inhaled shakily, her eyes pleading. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I messed up. But I love you. I do. And I'll do anything to fix this. Please, don't give up on us." A slow sigh escaped me as I dragged a hand down my face. "Sarah, stop." My voice was flat, drained of any emotion. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." Her lip trembled. "I do. I just..." "No." I cut her off before she could twist the knife any further. "You don't get to stand here and beg for something you already threw away." She stepped closer, hands clasped together like she was praying for a miracle. "I was lost. I didn't know how to fix things between us. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I swear." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. I shook my head. "It meant enough for you to lie about it for months." She flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor. No more excuses? Nothing left to say. Finally, I pushed myself up from the bed, the weight of the night pressing down on me like a boulder. "You made your choice, Sarah. Now I'm making mine." Her breath hitched. "So that's it?" I nodded once. "That's it." She wiped at her face, her shoulders shaking. For a second, I thought she might try again, fight harder. But then something in her eyes shifted. Defeat. She knew it was over. Without another word, she turned and walked away. I listened as she moved through the house, heard the jingle of her keys, the slow creak of the front door swinging open. Then, just like that, she was gone. I exhaled long and slow, rubbing my hands together as if I could scrub away the last few hours. The house around me felt different now, hollow in a way that went beyond her absence. Maybe it had been empty for a long time. I sat back down on the bed, staring at the floor, waiting for the crushing weight of it all to hit me. But it never did. Instead, for the first time in months, I felt something else. Relief. She shook her head frantically, standing up as if she was about to reach for me, but she stopped herself at the last second. Maybe she saw it in my face, that I was already gone. "Please," she whispered again, her voice raw with desperation. "Don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can." I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. "Sarah, stop." There was no anger left in my voice. Just exhaustion. "You don't get to decide that now. Not after everything." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly like she was trying to keep herself from completely falling apart. I just don't want to lose you. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved, the woman I had promised forever to. But the truth was, forever had ended long before tonight. It ended the moment she decided I wasn't enough. You already did. The words sat heavy between us, final and undeniable. I turned away, heading for the closet, grabbing a duffel bag and shoving in whatever I could reach, clothes, my wallet, my keys. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't stay here. Not in this house. Not with her. Jessica stood frozen, watching me pack. So that's it? Her voice cracked. You're just walking away? I zipped the bag shut and slung it over my shoulder. No, I said calmly. You walked away first. I'm just catching up. She let out a soft, broken sob, but I didn't turn around. I walked past her, past the life we had built, past the ruins of everything we were supposed to be. And when I stepped outside into the cold night air, I felt something settle deep in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. She had shattered something between us, something that no amount of apologies or tears could ever mend. After about 20 minutes of driving, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a rundown motel. I parked in the back, a bitter irony settling in, considering where this night had begun. But I wasn't in the mood to dwell on that. Right now, I just needed somewhere to crash, a place where I could think without the weight of that house suffocating me. The motel was exactly what I expected, dim hallways lit by flickering fluorescent lights, walls so thin I could hear muffled conversations and creaking beds, and the stale stench of cigarette smoke clinging to every surface. None of it mattered. I paid in cash, took the key, and walked down the dimly lit corridor, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. When I pushed open the door to my room, it was as depressing as I'd imagined. Cheap furniture, a bed that looked like it had given up on comfort years ago, and an old TV flickering in the corner, though I had no interest in turning it on. But this wasn't home. It wasn't supposed to be. It was just a space, somewhere I could exist for the night without having to think about what came next. I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed and sat beside it, running a hand through my hair, trying to quiet the storm raging in my head. It was strange. This was the first time in years that I was truly alone. No Sarah. No forced smiles. No pretending that things were fine. Just me, sitting in a cheap motel room, trying to process how my life had completely unraveled in a single night. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, debating whether to call someone, if there was even anyone to call. Ethan, my best friend, was probably asleep, and honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready to explain everything just yet. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over his name for a moment before I sighed and set the phone down. The truth was, I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling as the silence closed in around me. My mind kept dragging me back to the argument, to the way Jessica had begged me to stay, to forgive her, to fix what was broken. But what she didn't seem to understand was that some things couldn't be fixed. You can't just patch over betrayal and expect it to heal. Trust doesn't work that way. Once it's shattered, it's gone. I had given her everything, years of my life, my loyalty, my trust, and she had tossed it all away. And for what? A thrill? An escape? Whatever it was, it didn't matter. It wasn't just about what she did, it was the months of deception, the slow erosion of our marriage while she looked me in the eyes and pretended nothing was wrong. That was the part one couldn't forgive. I rolled onto my side, the motel bed groaning beneath me, and shut my eyes, willing sleep to come. But it wouldn't. My mind was stuck on an endless loop, replaying the moment I had seen her at that motel, the way her face had drained of color, the panic in her eyes when she realized she'd been caught. It played over and over, like a broken record, refusing to let me forget. With a frustrated sigh, I reached for my phone and started scrolling through old photos. Pictures of me and Jessica from better days. There was one of us on a hike, smiling at the camera, arms wrapped around each other like we had the whole world figured out. Looking at it now, it was almost impossible to believe that the two people in that photo were the same ones who had stood in that bedroom just hours ago, ripping each other apart. Morning light filtered weakly through the motel's thin curtains, casting everything in a washed-out glow. I woke up groggy, my neck stiff from the terrible excuse for a mattress. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of where I was or why I felt so hollow. Then, it all came rushing back, the argument, the betrayal, the way I had walked out. The ache in my chest was still there, but it felt different now. More distant. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and glanced at my phone. A part of me expected to see a flood of missed calls or messages from Sarah. But there was nothing. Relief settled in. At least she wasn't trying to drag me back into another pointless conversation. But another part of me wondered if she had already given up or if she was simply waiting for me to crack first. Not happening. I needed to talk to someone. Keeping all of this bottled up wasn't an option. Ethan. He'd been through his own rough patches, and if there was anyone I could trust to hear me out without judgment, it was him. I pulled up his number and hesitated for just a second before pressing call. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy but immediately laced with concern. "Hey, man. Everything all right?" I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "No," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Then, a little stronger. "I left her, Ethan. I'm at a motel right now." Silence. Not the kind that meant he didn't care, the kind that meant he was trying to figure out the right thing to say. Finally, his voice softened. "What happened?" I exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "She's been cheating on me," I said, the words bitter and raw as they left my mouth. "I caught her last night at a motel, with some guy." The words felt heavy on my tongue, like they didn't even belong to me. Saying them out loud made everything feel more real, like I couldn't take them back, no matter how much I wished I could. On the other end of the line, Ethan let out a low, drawn-out breath, the kind of sound you make when you're trying to wrap your head around something too awful to fully process. "Damn. I'm sorry, man. I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I," I admitted, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. "I mean, I had my suspicions. Things have been off for a while, but not like this." I paused, squeezing my eyes shut. The image of Sarah's wide, panicked eyes when she saw me in that motel lobby flashed behind my eyelids. "It's been going on for months." I confronted her, and she just kept lying, right to my face, like I was some idiot who couldn't see what was happening. Ethan was quiet for a moment, letting the words settle. I could almost picture him on the other end, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to figure out what to say next without making it worse. "Where are you now?" he finally asked, his voice softer. "Some crappy motel on the edge of town," I muttered, glancing around the dim room. The cigarette-stained walls and flickering neon light outside the window felt like a cruel reflection of how far I'd fallen in just one night. I couldn't stay there, Ethan. Not in that house. Not with her. "You want me to come by? We can grab breakfast or something, talk it through?" The offer hung in the air, and for the first time in hours, I felt something loosen inside my chest, like a rope that had been strangling me was finally starting to give. The idea of having someone there, someone who wasn't tangled up in this mess, felt like a lifeline. "Yeah," I said quietly, the word catching in my throat. "That would help." We agreed to meet at a diner not far from the motel. As I got ready, throwing on the same wrinkled clothes from the night before, I realized just how much I needed this conversation. I couldn't carry this on my own, not anymore. The drive to the diner was short, barely 10 minutes, but it felt like I was crossing some invisible line, leaving behind the ruins of the life I thought I had and stepping into something unknown. It wasn't freedom, not yet. But it was a start. Ethan was already there when I walked in, sitting at a booth in the corner with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. He waved when he saw me, his expression a mix of sympathy and quiet concern. Without saying a word, I slid into the seat across from him. He pushed one of the cups toward me, knowing without asking that I'd need it. "So," he said, leaning forward, both hands wrapped around his mug. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the distance, the way Jessica had been pulling away for months, the cold silences and forced smiles. I told him how I'd tried to ignore the nagging voice in the back of my head, convincing myself that every late night, every half-assed excuse, was nothing to worry about. I laid it all out, tracking her to the motel, the confrontation, the way she tried to twist the truth even when she was standing there with nowhere left to hide. Piece by piece, I unloaded the weight I'd been carrying for too long. Ethan listened the whole time, nodding occasionally, his face grim but patient. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. Man, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what she did. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I'm glad you left. You can't come back from something like that. I stared into my coffee, the bitter steam curling up into the space between us. I had spent so many nights convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, we could fix things if we just tried hard enough. But now, after everything, there was nothing left to fix. Yeah, I murmured more to myself than to him. I thought maybe we could get through it, but after last night, there's nothing left. Ethan was quiet for a second, then asked the question I'd been avoiding all morning. So, what's your plan now? I blinked, staring out the window at the sun climbing higher in the pale sky. The truth was, I didn't know. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. I guess I'll have to go back to the house at some point, I admitted slowly. Figure out what to do next, what to take, where to go. Ethan nodded, his fingers tapping lightly against the ceramic mug. You need a place to crash? Help packing up your stuff? A weak chuckle escaped me. Honestly? All of the above. He smirked, shaking his head. Figured as much. Look, man, whatever you need, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a small flicker of something buried beneath all the anger and heartache. Gratitude. Thanks, Ethan. I mean it. Anytime. We sat there for a while, letting the silence stretch between us, drinking coffee and talking about nothing in particular. And even though my whole life had just fallen apart for a brief moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay. The words, next steps, and divorce felt foreign, almost like they didn't belong to me yet. Ethan gave me a sympathetic look and said, If you need a place to crash, my couch is always open. You don't need to be alone in that house right now. The offer was tempting, and I knew he meant it, but there was something in me that resisted. I needed to face it head on. I had to go back and see the life I had left behind, even if it was just to try to make sense of it all. Thanks, I replied, managing a small smile. I might take you up on that, but I think I need to go back. Just not yet. For the next hour, we talked, not just about Jessica but about everything. Life, work, the small things that used to feel normal in a world that suddenly felt anything but. There was something oddly comforting in that, knowing that even when your life feels like it's falling apart, some things stay the same. Ethan had a way of simplifying everything, reminding me that this wasn't the end of the world. It was just a really painful chapter. As we finished breakfast and stepped outside into the cool morning air, I realized something. I wasn't as alone as I thought. I had friends. I had a life outside of the mess with Sarah. For the first time since the night before, I felt a flicker of hope. Not the naive hope that things would go back to the way they were, but the hope that I could rebuild, that maybe, just maybe, I could find myself again in the wreckage. You'll get through this, Ethan said, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder as we said our goodbyes. You're stronger than you think. I nodded, watching him drive off as the morning sun climbed higher into the sky. Getting back into my car, I realized that he was right. I didn't feel strong now, and I didn't feel like I had control over my life. But I had made the first step. And sometimes that's all you can do. I sat in my car outside the diner for a moment, watching as the sunlight brightened the world around me. It felt like the first time I'd really seen daylight in months, even though it had only been a few hours since I walked out of that house. There was a strange sensation in knowing that I was on the edge of something new, without any clear idea of what the next step would be. But at least I was moving forward. That was enough for now. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. The house was still there, and Jessica was still part of the mess I had to deal with. But instead of feeling crushed by all the decisions ahead of me, I felt this strange sense of calm. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, I wasn't looking backward. I wasn't focused on what I could have done differently or how I had let things get this far. What was done was done. I decided to head back to the house, not because I wanted to see her, but because I needed to face what was left of the life I had built. But because I needed to start taking back control of my life. I needed to face the mess, to confront whatever was left. I wasn't the same person who had walked out the night before. That guy had left with a heart full of rage and betrayal, still holding on to the hope that there was a chance for things to change. But now I was just ready to move on. The drive back seemed faster than usual, like my mind had shifted into overdrive, focused on what needed to be done. The house came into view, our house, though it no longer felt like ours. It felt like a place where two people had once lived, but only one of them had cared about staying. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Sarah's car still parked out front. A part of me had hoped she'd already left, but I knew better. She wasn't the type to just disappear. She'd stay, clinging to the possibility of us fixing things, but she didn't get it. There was nothing left to fix. I stepped out of the car, the weight of what was about to happen settling in my chest. I walked up to the front door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The air in the house was thick, heavy with the tension from the night before. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, but she looked up the moment I walked in. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. "You came back," she said quietly, her voice hopeful but fragile. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, looking at her, trying to reconcile the woman sitting in front of me with the woman I had loved for years. But I couldn't. Too much had happened. "I didn't come back for us," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. "I came back to get things in order." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I know you're angry. I know I messed up, but we can still—" "No," I interrupted, cutting her off before she could spin any more fantasies. "We can't. We're done, Sarah. Last night wasn't just a mistake. It was the truth coming out. You've been lying to me for months. Whatever we had, it's gone. I can't forgive that." She blinked, the weight of my words hitting her, and her mouth opened like she was about to say something. But then it closed again, as if she realized there was nothing left to argue. I could see the pain in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices. "So what now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I sat down across from her, feeling oddly calm. "We end this. I'll get a lawyer. We'll split the house, the finances, everything. I'll move out as soon as I can find a place," I said, my voice steady. "We don't need to drag this out." She looked down, nodding slowly. "I guess I knew this was coming," she said quietly. "But I didn't think it would happen like this." "Neither did I admitted. The truth was, I had known for a while that something was wrong. I just hadn't wanted to face it. For the next hour, we talked logistics. Cold, clinical, almost businesslike. Who would keep the house, how we would divide the money, the steps we needed to take to finalize the divorce. Jessica tried to remain civil, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Every once in a while, she'd glance up at me, her eyes full of guilt, like she wanted to say something that would fix everything. But she never did. There was nothing left to say. When we were done, I stood up, ready to leave. I had packed what I needed the night before, and I didn't want to stay in this house a moment longer than I had to. As I grabbed my bag, Jessica stood up too, her eyes wet with tears again. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For everything. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at her, but it was different now. There was a strange sense of detachment. The words were meaningless now. They didn't change anything. "I know," I said quietly, but final. "But it's too late for that." With that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life we had built. I didn't know where I was going yet, maybe to Ethan's for a few nights, maybe to a hotel until I found something more permanent. But as I drove away, something clicked. I wasn't looking back. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what I could have done differently or how I could have saved our marriage. I was focused on what came next. How I would rebuild. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare me. It felt like freedom, and that was enough. The house, the memories, the lies, they were all behind me now. All I had to do was keep driving. Keep moving forward. And that's exactly what I did. I pulled out my phone and deleted the photo, then another, and another. Each picture felt like a lie now, a reminder of what I thought we had but never really did. The more I scrolled, the more I realized how much of my life I had invested in someone who wasn't the person I thought she was. Finally, I put the phone down for good and just stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle in. There was no going back. I knew that now. No amount of words or promises could change what had happened. Jessica had made her choice, and now I had made mine. This was the first night of my new life, alone. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe, after everything, it was time to figure out who I was without her. To reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost in the years of trying to hold on to something that was already gone. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought kept repeating in my mind: it's over. And this time, I wasn't scared of what that meant.